Welcome to the second module of Marketing Strategy, the Big Picture. In this module, we're going to start making choices using the 6B framework, beginning with brand. Brand is that unit of analysis, that think of it as that part of the business that you're sort of scooping out and going to create a marketing strategy for. When we think of brand, we're really answering two key questions. The first one is, who are we? Who are we from the customer's point of view, looking back into the company? And what are we good at? What is our core competency? And I'll explore both of these questions separately. Let's start with the question of brand. Who are we? Now, you have to understand, first of all, that marketing, the big picture marketing strategy, we take a customer-centric point of view. How do we see things from the customers through the customer's lens? And one framework that we like to think about is, imagine you were walking with a customer through their journey, so to speak, in dealing with your brand, experiencing your brand. What does that mean? That means shopping for your products. That means searching for them and evaluating them, perhaps trying them, test driving them, buying them, using them, telling others about it. The customer journey is where they experience all the different, each touch point, something else is going on. And a well-constructed brand sort of walks that journey with them. Think of them as parallel paths, like you see here in this diagram. And the brand is really given the job of making that touch point consistent with what they would expect that brand to deliver. A brand, after all, is a promise. And so that brand sort of walks in step with the customer side by side. All the time, the customer's loyalty is increasing back to that brand because it did such a great job. The equity, the financial equity and value of that brand is increasing because of that loyalty. And it's a happy trail, so to speak, of a brand and a customer walking together. This is how we want you to think about that journey. And you have to pick the brand and make sure it's set up in a way that the customer really understands it. And that becomes that first key decision you make. What really is that brand that we're going to take to battle? Now, first thing I want to explain is something that confuses a lot of students and a lot of corporate executives is they sometimes confuse brands and products. Let me clarify that for you right now so you don't make that mistake too. A brand is simply a promise that you make to the market. A promise. It is not a fancy logo. It is not some clever tagline. It is nothing more than a promise that you make, that it makes to customers, to the market in general. Whereas a product, think of a product as nothing more than a delivery vehicle, a benefit delivery vehicle. If I were to hold up a product like this can of water that you see here, it is nothing more than a platform to deliver benefits to me. And people get these confused? Don't. Let's look at how they differ. And we're going to look at it through the eyes of a very popular model called the product life cycle. Products go through life cycles. They launch, they get into the market and grow, they mature, and eventually they start to fade. And I'll kind of move my head here so you can see they go into a decline. You might upgrade them. But the brand value endures. Products mature and maybe fade away, but the brands don't. They are distinct things, and you don't want to confuse the two. The brand is that unit of analysis. Now, if the product is doing a good job of delivering the promise, then yes, it is a key part of brand loyalty and brand equity. It's a key part of the customer journey experience, but it's not the only part. And products come and go, but brands don't. We like to think that they endure through time. Now, when you start to think about your choice of brand, you also have to understand how brands are organized within a company. A company has a collection of brands, promises, and under those brands are collections of products and services that deliver benefits. So companies need a way to organize these, just like employees. They put them into departments. They have a sort of an organizational architecture. Well, the same goes for brands. We create a brand architecture because it really helps employees and customers from the outside looking in what your company is all about. That, after all, is how customers understand you. They don't understand your organizational chart. They don't know your management team. They know your brands. And so you need to make it easy for them to understand you. Otherwise, they'll get confused and they'll just start to make it up. So brand architecture works like this. We have at one extreme what is an architecture called the umbrella model. The umbrella model means that there is one overarching umbrella brand that basically covers all the experiences. It's all encompassing. It is how the entire company is organized. At the other extreme, you have just the opposite. You have what are called a distinct formula, like you see here. Distinct is where the company has individual brands that live on their own. And so you look at a company like Louis Vuitton, LVMH, they have a set of distinct brands, and each one of those could be your choice of brand, or what we call the FE, the fundamental entity. And umbrella at one end is a company like Peloton or GE, for example. At this other end is the distinct version like Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati or LVMH. But what about this middle space? Well, it turns out you have some options here too. We have options that are called the hybrid models. They're a little bit of this and a little bit of that, as the name would imply. And they're also potential choices for you. First is what is called more of the umbrella-driven hybrid. That's where there is one overarching brand, but then some sub-brands. You have a master brand like Porsche, but then underneath it you have sub-brands like Cayenne, Macan, Taycan, etc. And your choice of brand could be one of those sub-brands. Now, this other model is more distinct driven, what we call the hybrid that is more sub-brand driven. And this is where the customer experience is more dominated by the individual sub-brands. Look at a company like Marriott, for example. And I'll get my head out of the way here. You can see Marriott has brands like the JW Marriott. It has companies like Courtyard. It has Fairfield Inn, Residence Inn. And each of those have their own brand promise, but they are all organized under the Marriott master brand. So you have a spectrum to deal with here. And so your job when you look at a company is, how are the brands organized now? Do customers understand us the way we want them to understand us? And then given all these choices, which unit of analysis am I going to use for my big picture strategy? You could choose an umbrella, you could choose one distinct brand, or something in the middle. Now, it has a lot of implications for you when you make that choice, just like any choice. And in the big picture, if you think, first of all, about your value proposition, which we'll get into, I believe, in week 4, we're going to realize that with the value proposition, you basically just have one value proposition for that master brand, one umbrella brand. If you have distinct, guess what? Each brand needs its own value proposition. So a company like Procter & Gamble with Crest toothpaste or Febreze or Pampers, each one of those has to have their own value proposition. You look at the relative costs, the costs for running an umbrella brand tend to be lower because you just have one spend. Whereas each brand in the distinct model architecture has to have its own spending, and you spend more. That's all there is to it. Resource allocation is going to be more decentralized with distinct branding. Flexibility is higher with distinct branding. Procter and Gamble has more flexibility with the kinds of things they can get into, whereas Peloton now is kind of locked into home healthcare. That's kind of home fitness. Let's put it that way. It doesn't give them as much flexibility. But on the other hand, the nice thing with distinct brands is that you have a problem where if one brand in the distinct lineup screws up or has, is a product recall or has some other unfavorable event happen to it, all the other all the other brands are sort of affected by that. And that could be a real challenge for a company. So let's answer now the second question. Now you have thought about what brand, you've made a choice of what brand you're going to really deal with here in terms of the big picture. You also have to answer this very important question of what are we good at, otherwise known as the core competence. Let me explain what a core competence is, and most importantly, explain why you as a marketer need to understand it. The word that you want to lock into your brain when it comes to core competence is this. It is a skill. It's a cross-functional skill, but it's a special skill because it leads to a sustainable competitive advantage. Companies have lots of skills, but not all of them are core. A company, for example, has to have a solid human resource department. Great, it can be very good at that, but that is not necessarily what gives it an advantage in a company. It has to have a great IT department and has to be skilled at all the things that go along with that, but that may not be what it uses to create a sustainable competitive advantage. And the core competence, those core skills are so important because that's what enables you to differentiate from other companies if you use them effectively and groom them. And it's unique to your company. You have to invest in it. But what core skills are used for is to create assets, strategic assets that turn into benefits. And this is so important for the marketer to understand because you may be thinking, well, employee skills sounds like something you should know about if you're an HR professional. Why does a marketing person need to know about the core competence? Well, let me tell you why. You need to understand the skills of a company so you don't try to go out there and do something that you don't have the skills for. Right? Think about it. I see companies with very good people, great products, but then they go out and try to do something they just don't have the skills to do, and they wonder why they struggle. A great marketer knows better, and they avoid doing things that they don't have the skills to do. They instead try to line up their strategies that leverage the unique talents that they have. Think about yourself. What are the things that you do better than anything else you do? Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's a collection, some sort of hobby that you work on. If you all of a sudden you tried to change into something else, you're going to find it challenging because you don't have the skills for it. If you use the skills in cooking to do something else in this hobby, you're going to have a mismatch. Well, companies are the same way. So think of it nothing more than this. You make choices that line up with your core competency. You figure out the core competency first. And then you say, forevermore, what are we going to do now that always takes advantage of that skill and not deviate from it? Otherwise, you're going to be on shaky ground. Well, how do you figure out the core competency of a firm? That is a question that has bothered companies ever since this idea of core competence was introduced several years ago by two researchers named Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad. You'll read about it in your textbook. They described the core competence of the firm, and it really made a big impact. It's one of the classic articles in the Harvard Business Review. Unfortunately, they didn't explain how you figure it out. Well, I'm going to help you with that idea now. Here's the way to think about core competence. A company has these competencies, and they use those skills then to create strategic assets. Assets could be physical assets that you can touch, or they could be intangible assets like a brand reputation. And those assets then are used by the company to create benefits for the customer, benefit A, B, C, D, and E, especially the primary benefit, benefit A. Now, the way to figure out core competence may surprise you. When you look at a company, you start by looking at its primary benefit that it's delivering, and then you work backwards to link it to the strategic assets that are used to deliver that benefit. And then you go back and say, now, who are the people in the company that have the skills that create and manage that strategic asset? And this is what confuses people, and you're going to practice it in your group project. You'll see this on your final exam. You start with benefits, work backwards to the strategic assets, then work back to the core competencies. And why? Because you need to know what you're good at, so you don't go out and try to do something that you just don't have the skill to do. You always align your strategies to your competencies. So, core competencies come in different types, and here are some examples of companies and where they lie on this sort of spectrum, this three-dimensional view of core competencies. Some are more customer intimate, some are more functionally driven, some are more about operational excellence. So for example, you look at BMW, right? BMW, the ultimate driving machine. It's all about functional performance. Google, the Google search engine, or Apple products, clearly they're more of a hybrid, somewhere between functional performance and customer intimacy. You look down at operationally driven companies, clearly the heavy logistics companies like Walmart, FedEx. I would say Toyota is a hybrid between functional performance and operational excellence. Amazon now starts to split between operational excellence and customer intimacy. Then you look at companies like Harley-Davidson or the Four Seasons, all about customer intimacy. You know, the Harley-Davidson motorcycle is not about the bicycle itself, the motorcycle itself, because you know it's loud and it's awkward, but it's a lifestyle brand. It's all about how customers are loyal to that brand and everything they think about. Same with Four Seasons. So when you start to analyze a company, think about where you are on this grid. Are you more operationally driven? Are you more customer intimacy driven or functionally driven? Where do those skills lie? What is it that you're going to leverage to go out and do in the marketplace? So finally, let's wrap up with our look at our 4 strategic quadrants, the 4 go-to-market strategies. If you're in quadrant 1, you're probably looking at some sort of new brand to attract customers into the category. It's going to be certainly new from their point of view. They're not in the category yet. If you're going to look somewhere in case of your quadrant 2, loyal customers, you're going to take an existing brand, something they already understand, and look at how you get them to grow. Whereas quadrant 3, again, it's an existing brand, probably more of an umbrella-driven hybrid, something that you realize with multi-brand customers is they're using multiple brands. They like a lot of choices, and so hybrid brands give them those choices. To think about Marriott, you stay at different Marriott properties, and so the hybrid model works very well down in quadrant 3. But over in quadrant 4, where you're dealing with competitive customers, you're really going to have to hit them hard with some new brand, probably distinct or sub-brand driven, something specifically tailored to their needs to make them consider trying you or switching over to you. So that is it for week 2, module 2 of our course. This week, like before, continue to work with your colleagues on your group case assignment. Get into the discussion boards as usual, and be sure to stay current with the textbook. The textbook is very well written. I know, because I had a big hand in working with Marta over the years and creating these concepts, and we want you to get the most out of this that it can offer. We'll see you in the next module.